Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm happy to see you. My name is Alex, and welcome to the introduction to OpenNebula operations. If you can hear me well, then please drop an exclamation mark or question mark or @ straight into the comment section into the chat, so I know that I'm perfectly audible and my screen is visible. Thank you for confirming that. Awesome. So let's kick in. Now, today in our agenda, what we're going to talk about is Sunstone. So we going to speak on what the Sunstone is and how to use it. We will talk about the user settings, discuss virtual networks. We'll discuss marketplace and apps, as well as talk about the VM templates. And in the end of the day, we're going to deploy the virtual machine. So if you'd like to follow along, I hope you prepared your Mini One deployment and your physical server or any other server that you can follow. This one is going to get recorded anyways, so you will be able to follow along the recording if you forgot to bring your own spare Mini One deployment. So let's begin. The first thing is Sunstone, right? You will find this in the documentation quite a lot that we refer to some kind of entity called Sunstone. So, what the Sunstone is? So, Sunstone is the web-based graphical user interface, right? That is one of the ways how you can communicate with OpenNebula, perform settings, instantiate VMs, update VMs, and so on and so forth. There is also a second option that's always there, and that would be the command line interface, which is also robust. But yeah, we like also to we like graphical user interface a lot. So here it is. It's called Sunstone. Now, if it's not proxied and installed as is, and especially if it comes with Mini One deployment, then it listens on 2616. So that would be the port for Sunstone. If you installed from Mini One, please note that then your OpenNebula deployment runs two Sunstones. There is the old Sunstone and new Sunstone. The old one is running on a port 80, while the new one is running on a port 2616. The old one is deprecated, so you know, and well, at some point it's going to get removed, but it's there for compatibility. And in case, for example, you have a lot of documentation, internal documentation based on the older version of Sunstone. So that's why it's still there. Now, the good thing about the Sunstone that it has built-in one-time password multi-factor authentication available. So if you'd like to secure your account, then feel free to enroll your MFA. And another very cool feature, and I would say this is even better in the newer Sunstone, that the administrators and cloud users, it's the same entry point for all the users of OpenNebula. And the only minor difference that the view or available menus will differ, but you don't have to host multiple front ends or multiple graphical user interfaces. It's still the same graphical user interface, just uh, the icons and availability is going to differ a bit, right? So then it looks the following way, right? When you log in on the Soundstone, it welcomes you with this with this amazing screen. Now, the username and the password, it is quite important. So if you installed from Mini One, then there is the availability to add the password to the command line when you install it, so you know what the password is. Alternatively, there is a dedicated file that you can cat, and that's pretty much written into the documentation. And that file is going to contain the password. So the user I'm going to use is one admin, and that is the very important user, right? So one admin is the apex administrator of OpenNebula. It so the one admin cannot be limited. The one admin can access everything everywhere. And there is also a group called one admin. And if you add a user to that group, that user receives these godlike powers and can do whatever this user wants. So be very careful who is going to get the permissions or who is going to be a member of the one admin group, because that's basically the keys from the kingdom, right? You can do and access whatever you want with this permissions. Now, as soon as you signed in, you will going to get to dashboard, and dashboard is um, pretty much the entry point for any type of the user. As I mentioned, there is a different views for every user type, and majority of your users are going to access Sunstone with the cloud view or user view. Now, what's the major difference? If you look on the left, there is a bunch of tabs like VMs, services, virtual machine templates, apps, users, and settings. So if I'm going to switch to the admin view, you already can see that the amount of available tabs just changed by a hefty margin, right? And again, that is the way uh, how the view is going to differ from an admin to a simple user. Now, I need to warn you that this is, let's say, a soft limiter, right? While it limits what you can access, but your actual permissions are going to get calculated based on specific groups and access and so on and so forth. So even if I will somehow limit some user, and this user is not going to be able to access a certain tab, for example, images, in the command line, if that user has all the permissions to manage those images in the command line, this user will be able to do so, right? So again, this is just a way how you can make interface less clumsy for those who don't need it, right? So if someone has no intent to access the infrastructure management or networks management or images management, then why this user should be able to do so, right? So that's why you can make the interface less clumsy for the users who are just using OpenNebula and not going to perform any administrative tasks here. Right. So then you have your user settings, right? And user settings is another important part of any user, right? There are few key things that this user can perform, and one which is very important is the user configuration for SSH key, because you would like, when you deploy a virtual machine, then you would like to access this virtual machine, and if that's the Linux VM, then most of the time you would like also to access it from the secure shell. Now, what you can do, you can enroll your public key to your profile, and this public key will be automatically added to your virtual machine. Of course, it all depends on settings, but by default, Linux VMs that are distributed by OpenNebula, so these templates, they contain the setting to place the secure shell public key of the user who had instantiated this virtual machine in the authorized keys. So you can access this virtual machine straight away from your computer. Now, for that, you will need to import this secure shell public key. Luckily for us, if you install from Mini1, then secure shell public key is already there, and that is the secure shell public key of the one admin user, the one admin system user. So all that was already handled by, but if you are creating new user, then this user should enroll its own public key. So another thing is, of course, the schema, right? So you can prefer the dark schema or you can prefer the light one. I pretty much prefer so it follows my computer's one, but for demonstration, I prefer to make it light, right? So I will enforce it. Plus, you can add your labels here. Labels, again, quite a good thing because you can assign those labels to virtual machines, and then it's going to help you when you'd like to filter out some virtual machines and only work with a certain part. So you can use these labels, and where you can create those labels under the settings. And last but not least, what I would like to mention here is the two-factor authentication. So where you can register your authentication app. So what you can register that? Well, pretty much any application that supports a one-time password. It could be Microsoft Authenticator. It might be Bitward and LastPass. It might be Google Authenticator. So whatever can generate those is pretty much supported, and it's quite easy to achieve, right? So you just register and scan QR code, enter the verification, and off you go. So that would be something that you can configure for your user, right? And these are the general user settings. Now, what we should always be aware of is the user's configuration is obviously fine, but in the end of the day, we would like to run some workloads, right? So we would like to run some virtual machines and so on and so forth. Now, also, when we are running our virtual machines, we would like these virtual machines to connect to network. It might be to access internet or sometimes to access the internal resources. But anyways, you need that networking capabilities. In OpenNebula, we support multitude of standards like the Open vSwitch. We support VXLAN, we support .1Q, and we also support Simple Bridge if you would like to have it. Now, another cool thing that we support is security group functionality, and these security groups, it's basically the way how you can filter traffic before it actually gets to the virtual machine. So instead of configuring all your firewall in each individual machine, you can configure it using the security groups. Now that is quite important part. Now, when you are going to use security groups, please keep in mind that bridge with security groups, it's the dedicated type, only supports security groups, VXLAN or .1Q. Open vSwitch with VXLAN support, and bridge at the moment are not supporting that security group functionality. So again, it is something that we need to be generally aware of. Now, all your, let me switch back to admin view, all your virtual networks are available under the virtual networks. If you installed from the mini one, then you have the VNet, one VNet by default already created. Now you can create more virtual networks if you wish by just simply pressing the plus. And then you must give it some kind of a name and assign it to a cluster. By default, it's going to go to a default cluster. And let's say name would be private net. Now, what else you need to do? You need to specify the specific virtual network driver that you would like to use along with this network. So again, it could be bridged. It might be bridged with security groups. It might be .1q, VXLAN, OpenVSwitch, or OpenVSwitch with the VXLAN support. So pick the one you wish. Now, for let's say bridged, there is this toggle use only private host networking. That basically means that this traffic should not leave this physical host, and which is very convenient if you would like to, uh, let's say, isolate your workloads and then use some kind of a jump host in order to reach them, right? Otherwise, if you are not going to go with the private host networking, then you will need to assign it to some kind of a physical device, right? So, and that physical device name should be the one that you are going to use. And for example, in my case, if I would create one, I will need to assign the ENO1 to that um, to that bridge. So in my case, I for this network, I'm only going to proceed with the private host networking. So it's to me, it's fair to not to bother about the physical network card. But again, if you would like to attach it to a physical device, then you must point it out. Otherwise, you will not be able to proceed. So keep that in mind. Now, the next thing, that's where you're supposed to create the address ranges. That's where you're supposed to configure security. So select those security groups. But again, in my case, it's bridged. So I don't, it doesn't matter what I will select under the security groups because these security groups are going to get ignored in the end of the day. And that's why for a simple bridge, it doesn't matter. Then quality of service and context variables. Let's start with the network address range. Right. So whatever I will configure here is just for demonstration purposes, right? But when you're going to configure this in your environment, you should be aware of your networking capabilities, right? So how your network is set up. So because when you add your address ranges, there's multitude of options, and again, it depends how you would like your IP addresses to be configured on your virtual machines, right? It may be you would like these IP addresses to be assigned by OpenNebula, or maybe you are running the external DHCP server, so you would like OpenNebula just to hand over the MAC address to that virtual machine, and then the IP address settings you will get from that external DHCP. So you see that is quite important. Then what you have here is IPv4 settings. You have IPv4 slash v6 or only v6, IPv6 with no slack, and simple Ethernet, right? So the major difference between these two is that if you go to every setting right here, you have to point out, or you have abilities to point out to the IP addresses and to the MAC addresses. So, for example, if you would like a specific MAC address to be used, if you go to the Ethernet, then the only thing that you can configure is the MAC address, which basically in this case means that there is the external DHCP server that is going to assign IP addresses, or Alternatively, you may want on to get the MAC address assigned, and then you will log in using the VNC to the virtual machine and will configure all the IP settings manually, right? So again, these are the options that you can play with. Now, in my case, I would like my IP addresses to be assigned by the I would like this IP addresses to be assigned by OpenNebula. So again, in my case, I would proceed with IPv4, and I don't care about MAC addresses at this point, so I will leave it empty because OpenNebula has a built-in pattern to use for MAC addresses. So I don't want to kind of manage this, at least right now. So the only thing I do care would be the IPv4 addressing. So 192.168.22 would be my first IP address. And then I would like to have 40 unique IP addresses to be generated for this network. Right. So as I mentioned, security, I don't care. Quality of service, again, it's not something that I care about at the moment for this network, but the context, it's again maybe something that you would like to configure if that matters. So this private network may be routable to you, maybe not. In my case, it's not routable. So again, in my case, I'm pretty much okay for this uh, address range to be configured, and the rest is fine. But let's say if I would like to configure the DNS server and I would like automatically to configure the gateway, then I would go to context, and that's where I would configure the settings. Like again, the gateway, it might be let's say 192.168.20.1, and my DNS might be 1111. Now, again, that is something that you can use if it's applicable to this network type, because whatever you're going to configure here, always think of always think of the network setup that you have, right? Because, for example, if you are receiving all that via the DHCP, you actually don't care about the gateway, you don't care about the DNS, and most of the time you don't care about the IPv4, right? So you just need Ethernet card, and then you go to context, and under the method you select, okay, it's DHCP v4. So uh, I'm only receiving the only the MAC address going to be assigned to the network card on that virtual machine, and the rest is going to get handled by the external DHCP, right? Alternatively, I can just completely skip the IPv4 configuration and connect and configure it manually, or it might be none, or use default, or static, which basically the same. So this is going to be based on the context, so based on whatever is configured here. Now, it's important to mention that you must have some kind of range, right? So you cannot leave the range empty. So it's supposed to be either MAC addresses, so Ethernet type, or IP something type. You cannot leave it empty because then you don't have any leases, so the virtual machine most likely will fail to deploy. So keep in mind that either IPv4 must be configured, or v6, or combined, or just Ethernet card with MAC addresses. But that's the thing that is mandatory, right? The rest is pretty much optional, but you must hand out some kind of address, either the IP address or just simply MAC address. Now, another cool feature I would like to share with you would be a reservation, right? So, what the reservation is, it's pretty easy. Let's describe it like that. So I'm managing my OpenNebula environment, and I have Joan and I have Jane, right? So Joan and Jane both are member of different groups, and they manage completely different virtual machines, but they would like to have some kind of networking. And in the most simplistic way, what I can do is I can share my private net with John and with Jane, which to some extent would be fine ish, but I'm kind of giving away the whole network. So John and Jane now have access to my private net and pretty much can consume as many as they wish. Again, I can limit with other options, but let's just take the simplistic approach, right? So I'm giving them this network. Now they also can use this network so they can consume as many IP addresses as they wish, or Ethernet MAC addresses, which might not be my end goal, right? So I would like to give only 10 addresses to Jane and 10 addresses to John. How I can do that? But they still would like to be part of this network, right? So, how I can do that? I can do that with the help of reservation. So, I can reserve a certain amount of IP addresses or Ethernet addresses from this network so we remain in the same network, let's say 10, but I don't need to give away the whole network to them. So what I need to select the range, and again, I must be sure that I actually have those 10 addresses, right? Because in the end of the day, my virtual machines that I will attach to this network are going to use the same address space. So I must I need to be sure that I have this 10 spare addresses that I can provide. So then, of course, set first address that is going to be supplied to this reservation and the name of this reservation. So that would be Jones reservation, right? And yeah, so even though this range, I might wish to give a different, so starting from a different IP address, and I can select the first IP address here. So that would be 192.168.20.20. So John is going to get 10 IP addresses starting from the address that ends up with 20. That gives me a little bit of maneuverability in for my own, and that also gives. I'm kind of sure that, for example, John is going to get his 10 addresses reserved, or alternatively, I can just leave it empty, and then this decision will be handled by OpenNebula. So basically, it's going to take whatever is available. So let's click accept, and we get the John's reservation. The cool thing about this is that the John's reservation is going to inherit all my settings that I've configured previously, right? So the gateway, for example, the DNS, the type, and so on and so forth, which again gives a pretty quick way how I can shape my network and give this network away to some specific users or user groups without actually giving them access to my the whole address space that I've created. Good. So that is the reservation. But then what you can see right now is that I have my private net already occupied with something. So if you open it and go to leases, then you can see that there are 20, or in this case 10, sorry, there there are 10 IP addresses that are reserved and reserved by a specific network, which again we make sure that these MAC addresses and these IP addresses are not going to get assigned to any virtual machine that I'm going to create. So, which is again pretty much logical because if you reserve them, you don't want them to be assigned anywhere. So that's why these are marked as reserved. Alternatively, if I know that there is a certain IP address that I would like uh, to be reserved for my certain needs. For example, I know that there is the virtual IP address that I would like to reuse, and I don't want this IP address to get assigned anywhere. Even like I don't want it to go into any new reservation and so on and so forth. And I can do that by just simply going there and tell that IP address 12 we put on hold. And now this IP is marked as being on hold. So it means that it's not going to get automatically assigned to any virtual machine, and no any reservation will be able to claim it. Right. So if I'm going to try to create a reservation that includes this IP address, it's going to fail because it tells like, hey, this IP address is kind of reserved. So no way you can acquire it, which is pretty much handy if you know that you will need specific IP addresses to be reserved for certain needs. And this is how you can achieve that. Right. But all that is a private network. Let's focus on our mini ones created virtual network because this virtual network is routable. So my virtual machine will be able to install something or reach the internet and download some packages and so on and so forth. But there is one minor change I need to make. And you may need to make it or may not. That depends. But for safety reasons, I would recommend to do it in this environment because sometimes your network may not allow the rogue DNS or any other DNS server to try to perform the DNS role. And the request by this specific IP address may get blocked. To avoid that, select your VNet, which is with the ID 0, scroll all the way down, expand attributes, locate DNS. As you can see, right now it is the same as the gateway, but change the DNS from being 172.16.101 to 1111. Right? Again, it your network may react on it badly, may react on this good. It depends on your setup, but I found that in a lot of networks by default, you cannot install the DNS server, and your basically deployment of the VM with this DNS is going to fail when it comes to installing some packages. That's why, for safety reasons, let's change the DNS from 172.16.101 to just 1.1.1.1. Right. So our virtual network is up and ready, right? So we can start using that. And then it is a good segue to marketplace and apps, right? We would like to deploy a VM, but where we should take the image for this virtual machine and what is the OpenNebula way of deploying virtual machines? Now, there are a few concepts that you need to keep in mind. Images, virtual machine templates, right? So, image is the snapshot of a disk. And it may be the bootable OS, but it also may be the CD-ROM, right? The ISO. It may be just a regular disk with some files, and it actually may be even an empty disk, right? It may be an empty data block that you will will be using for to store some data, or I mean whatever your use case. But just set To set this correctly, that image is a snapshot of a disk. And in OpenNebula, we are not deploying your virtual machines from the image. We are going to deploy it from the virtual machine template, right? And the virtual machine template defines the settings for your upcoming VM. So the images, the virtual networks, the CPU, the available memory, and so on and so forth. Now, where to get all that? You can get it from the marketplace. Marketplace effectively is the source of these pre-built images. And marketplace can be public, marketplace can be private. So we, as OpenNebula, we are hosting our marketplace with ready-to-use images. And these images you just download, next, finish, pretty much, and it is up and running. The only thing you need to take care of, obviously, is to assign the correct network. And pretty much that's it. Now, and these are vanilla operating systems, and then you can install your applications on top of that. But sometimes you may want to keep a repository of your private images. And that's where private marketplaces are very handy. Now, your private marketplace can be the S3 bucket technology based, or it can be the HTTP web server based. So, whatever your case is, please feel free to use that. So, where to get the list of the marketplaces? Of course, under the storage marketplaces, right? So that's where you have your marketplaces. Now, by default, the installation comes with the disabled LXC Linux containers and enabled OpenNebula Public. So if you have your own marketplace or a third-party custom marketplace, doesn't matter. But if you have this one, then you can add it by clicking plus here and go select the storage backend, and so on and so forth. But again, if you so the main idea of a custom private marketplace is to keep your images. If you would like to use the vanilla images, then I don't see any reason to actually going through the hustle of storing or keeping your own marketplace, right? So our images are ready to use with all the necessary software because there is always the operating system, but then there is a tiny bit called contextualization. So that what is built into our images so you can configure, for example, something like network card. Without that, you're only going to get the OS up and running, but no IP addresses or automatic configuration of the network card is available. So you will need that contextualization package to be there. And our images, they come with all that contextualization package. So again, as I mentioned, it's pretty much a next finish, and you have your virtual machine up and running. So, where to get all these? From the marketplace. But how to access them is by navigating to apps. So, the apps will be the list with images coming from all enabled marketplaces. Now, we have also the concept of services. So, service is the multi VM deployment where typically your virtual machines are interconnected and form some kind of application, right? So, and that might be something like, the web page with the external database, the cache server, and then some kind of reverse proxy in front of it, or it may be something even more complex. The cool thing with services, it allows the scalability, so you can scale every role and either manually or with the help of automation. So these services are going to use the virtual machine templates, and we have a bunch of services in the OpenNebula marketplace. So, but please note that if it has a service in the name, that actually doesn't mean that it's a service, the one that I've just described, because the service template can be found using the filter type service template. Then it's going to list these service templates that I've just described. Anyways, let's download an image. And we are going to search for Ubuntu 2404 image. Let's select it. And this image comes along with the template, which is very handy because, again, as you remember, image is a snapshot of a disk, but we need a template. And click import that into the data store. Now, when you are going to import, you have two windows here, right? So the name for an image and name for the virtual machine template. Please note that you may have only one virtual machine template with the same name, and the same thing comes to an image, right? So if you can always download it once again, but if you download it once again and you already have the same named VM template and same named image, make sure to add something like, for example, V2 or vanilla or something in that fashion, right? Again, because you can have they can have the same name. And a very handy thing is to export the associated template or images, because sometimes, especially with services, your VM template may have multiple images. That's why it's very handy to export also the associated virtual machine template and image. And obviously, you need to place it somewhere. And one of the important bit here is that you should place it onto the image data store, right? We have multiple data store types, like the system data store for the running VMs. We have the image data store that keeps these images, and we also have file data store that keeps plain text files. So when it comes to images, you must place it onto the image data store. Again, these data stores may be local to the hypervisor. These data stores may be shared and network attached. So there are a multitude of options. But again, make sure to place it onto the right data store. Now, there is image and there is virtual machine template, which is very important, right? Because virtual machine template is treat it as the configuration file, right? It's text based. So if you go to the virtual machine template list, you may already find the Ubuntu 2404 already there, because again, it's the pretty much a plain text, which and download it is pretty much easy and very fast. Now, when it comes to image is a snapshot of a disk, and it may take a little bit of time, depends on your network connection, of course, but it may take a little bit of time to actually download that onto the data store. So that's why your VM template may be already there, while your image might not be ready yet. So keep this in mind, and you can instantiate your virtual machine when your image is ready. In my case, my image is ready. Now, virtual machine template also holds the information about all the network cards, and you can have multiple network cards assigned. Some settings can be adjusted by the administrator, and when you deploy virtual machine, when your user is going to deploy virtual machine, some of the settings may be adjusted by the user. For example, user actually deploying virtual machine out of the box by default may change the memory. So let's say your virtual machine template is configured to have 2 gigs of memory. The user may configure 4 gigs of memory. This can be adjusted so you can actually revoke these permissions from the user, but that is completely different story. But out of the box, just be aware that what the user can do. And the services that I've recently described, these services or multi-VM deployments are going to rely on the virtual machine templates anyways. So the virtual machine template is a very crucial part of OpenNebula. Right. Let's go to virtual machine template. Let's locate the Alpine Linux 320 and let's update it. So click update, select KVM. Let's bump up the memory. Let's do it 512. The physical CPU core to be assigned one is pretty much enough. What else you can do? As the one admin, you can deploy this virtual machine or instantiate this virtual machine as a different user. So you have this functionality, right? And be aware of that when you deploy virtual machine with a certain ownership, you must be sure that this user can have access to all the parts of that virtual machine template, which includes all the images and all the virtual networks. That is quite important, right? But again, that is pretty much what you can do. Now, let's go to the next page. That's where all the fun begins, right? That's where you actually can assign other resources like attach a different image. Remember, image is a snapshot of a disk. It may be bootable, maybe just a disk with files or just an empty data block. So that's where you are going to attach other disks, or as we call them, images. That's where you are also going to set up the networking. And what's good about here, you can create an alias, and this alias will uh, take another, will assign another address, maybe IP address, to the same virtual network. So if you'd like to have two virtual IP addresses, instead of having two network cards in the same network, you can just create an alias, and that is going to be enough. Now, what else you can do? You can override some certain settings. For example, you can change the virtual network, or you even tell that you would like to select network automatically based on a specific pattern. So again, this is also possible, but there is one catch. So currently, if we talking about the automatic network selection and virtual networks, you can reattach or change network on the running virtual machine. Now, this automatic network selection only works when you deploy or instantiate virtual machine. When virtual machine is already running, this is not going to work. Then manual option is the only way to go when your virtual machine is up and running. Again, just keep that in mind if you'd like to benefit from this functionality. So you can set a different operating system and CPU functions. You can pass through the PCI devices. You can change the input and output type. And you can configure a lot of things like the placement to make sure that your virtual machine is going to be placed on a certain server, the NUMA assignment, some scheduled actions. But there's one thing that I really enjoy, and that is the context. So the context happens thanks to the contextualization package that we have. And context can run a specific commands, a certain commands that you are going to place here. Plus, as you can see here, there is the secure shell public key configuration. So what else you can do? You can actually add some other public key. Let me have a look if I have anything in my clipboard. Yes, I do. So for example, like this. So I have my laptop's public key, and then the second key will be the user's secure shell public key. So the one who instantiates that. So again, there might be different cases where you would like this to be configured. Please note that this can be configured only by the administrator of the virtual machine template. So user will not be able to override it. Now, same goes to start script. So that would be a set of commands that your virtual machine is going to run after the instantiation. So for sake of this, let's do a simple Apache 2 deployment, and we'll start the web server. So apk add Apache 2 and httpd. So if that is shell, then you can pretty much start by typing the commands. If that's going to be any other coding language, then you will need to set the interpreter as the first step. But for shell, you don't need to do it. And my advice would be to encode script in base64. You like in this case, we don't have anything specific, but let's say if you would like to configure some repositories and run some complex scenarios, you may have some special characters. So what you would like to is encode the script in base64. So you don't need to escape your special characters, or you don't experience any errors with this special characters being there. So that pretty much a very, very good switch that you would like to be there. Then files, so you can pass specific files to be available to your virtual machine. And then there is another nice section, and that is the context custom variables. So that is the way how you can set some specific things without actually scripting them. And this comes to a password. That is the password of the root user. Then it also may be the time zone. That also may be the host name. And again, there are a bunch of them. And in fact, we're also going to use them to configure something like networking and so on and so forth. So if you'd like to get the full list of available variables, plus whether these are available on Linux or these are available on Windows, and whether these are mandatory or optional, you can look in by following in the link that's going to be pasted in the comments section pretty much soon, or just look that in the documentation. There is the pretty extensive list with all the variables that are available. Let's say in our case, we would like to set the time zone, right? And we would like to set user password, and I would like to set the host name. So that we go very simplistic here. So time zone is Europe, Riga in my case, right? And the host name, so set host name is going to be demo, right? Again, very simplistic, and but your case may be different. So you may also actually pass some other variables that your scripts are going to work with. So it's something that we have here is for our use case, but you may also have your custom variables to be passed to your virtual machine, right? So that is the important thing here. Cool. So I've configured this one. I've configured the variables. I've set the time zone. I set the host name. So my virtual machine template is pretty much ready to go. Right. So now let's talk about the virtual machine, and let's instantiate the virtual machine in the end of the day. So to instantiate, just press the play button, and then you can set the virtual machine name. You can set the number of instances. This is a very cool feature. The number of instances is basically how many of the same configured VMs you are going to have in this deployment. And well, let's do 4, right? Let's deploy 4. Now, also there is the virtual machine name, and that would be Alpine. Then I will place dash. and percentage sign IDX. So what is going to do here? It is going to take the ID or the number of this virtual machine within this deployment and is going to add it here. So my first VM is going to be Alpine-0, second Alpine-1, -2, and -3. And this is pretty much handy if you like to distinguish them somehow and you would like to have a custom naming there. If I will leave this empty, it is going to be named as my template and then the ID of that virtual machine. Okay, let's press next. And well, storage, I would like to keep it as is. Networking was already configured, so I don't need to configure anything here. So I need just to press finish, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. And yeah. So let's press refresh. We see that it's slowly getting deployed. As soon as you have this, you can access your virtual machine through the VNC and observe the deployment, right? So you can access your virtual machine via the VNC. Once the virtual machine deployed, you can perform different actions with this one. Like, for example, take a snapshot of a disk, like change the networking, or let's say attach a new network card. Let's do that for one of our VMs. Right, so we attached a yet another network card and hand over the IP address along with the MAC. You can take a snapshot of a full virtual machine, or you actually can change the configuration. For example, I forgot a password, right? I don't remember what the password is, right? Because password is obfuscated and obviously you cannot just decrypt it that easy. So, but I would like to access my virtual machine. Of course, you can say like, hey, Alex, but you have the secure shell public key there enrolled. So technically you can do SSH. Yes, I can, but let's make it challenging. From using the VNC, right? I would like to access it somehow. I know that I'm root, but my password, I don't remember the password. So with the help of the contextualization, I can go to the configuration part. I can update the VM configuration, go to context, scroll all the way down, right? Locate the password, and let's set it to demo. So, okay, let's save it. Again, as you can see, the password again is never stored in a plain text here, so um, that is good. Anyways, let me jump into my VNC once again. And let's do root. Sorry, root demo. And as you can see, I'm in, right? So that effectively tells you that you can reconfigure this contextualization variables on the fly, and these are going to get applied. And another cool thing, you can see it in the state of the VM. So when it undergoes some specific changes, then it's not green, but the status slide is blue. Obviously, when stuff is done, you have it back in the running state. Cool. Now let's see if Apache 2 is up and running. So ps aux grep httpd. Yep, as you can see, the HTTP, the web server was installed correctly, which means that my start script is actually working. And let me try to curl to that virtual machine. And we can see that it works. Again, depends on your networking setup. You may able to access this IP address from your computer, or in my case, it's not on-prem, so that is the remote server, and the only thing I can do is access it via the command line using my SSH. But anyhow, as you can see, everything works, right? So the Apache 2 web server was installed following the script that I introduced. As you can see, the password change worked out, and also I can secure shell to this server. Sorry, probably I forgot to type the correct user. That's root. And as you can see, I've secure shelled to that machine without any issues. So I basically can access it directly and not going the VNC way. So, right. Basically, what effectively it means that, well, virtual machine can be deployed in batches. You can access it in the different ways. You can back the machine app. You can turn your disk into an image and later reuse it in the new deployment of your virtual machines. And yeah, you can run your commands. You can configure it the way you wish using the virtual machine template and the contextualization package. And well, we went from not having the virtual machine with having 4 virtual machines successfully up and running. So the goal of this webinar is actually achieved. So if you have any questions, then that would be the right time to use the chat to ask the questions related to today's topic. I'll be more than happy to answer. Otherwise, if nothing comes to your mind right now, feel free to use forum, our community page, and first of all, you can use search. Maybe your question was already answered by someone from community or by our engineers that are also answering there. Or if it's not there, then feel free to ask this question, and yeah, that the community folks are going to help you there. Plus, don't forget our documentation. Our documentation is pretty much populated with a lot of cool stuff with the examples, and some of them are copy pastable. So yeah, feel free to use that. Right. How do you interface to a third party storage? Well, good question. That depends what your third party storage is. But let's say if that is the network attached storage that you just need to mount it to your OpenNebula frontend and to your hypervisor, and you can use it. So there again, I would refer you a little bit to documentation because every storage type requires its own configuration. That's why the documentation would be the best place where you can look for your specific use case. But effectively, yes, you need to make sure that the front end, the OpenNebula control or management server, along with all the virtualization workers, can access this remote data storage. Otherwise, you always can use the local one. Well, for more and to list to sign up for the upcoming webinars, because we have webinars on plenty of topics. We have something like the one swap. We have the migration webinars. We have another training webinars. So please visit our webinars page and sign up for more. We have plenty of cool webinars upcoming. Also, if you would like to get trained and certified on OpenNebula, then feel free to sign up for our classes. We are running them bi-monthly, and we're running the certified practitioner, the certified administrator, and certified expert trainings. So feel free to sign up for this. Do we have any other questions? You're always welcome. All right. So, since we don't have any more questions, then I would like to thank you for attending. And we are going to wrap this session up. Thanks for attending. It was a pleasure to deliver this webinar to you. And see you next time. And see you next week if you would like to attend any other um, training webinar delivered by myself. Thank you and see you again soon. Bye bye.